Please don't forget to subscribe so. In a small dusty village deep in the heart of Africa, where the sun kissed the red earth and the winds whispered old songs through the baobab trees, there lived a girl named Amara. She was born under a rare moon, and from the first day of her life, her eyes were clouded with darkness. Amara was blind. Her parents, poor farmers, loved her dearly. But in a land where everyone must work the land to survive, a blind daughter was seen as a burden. People whispered behind their backs, saying she was cursed, saying the spirits had taken her sight because of sins from past generations. Still, Amara grew up kind and gentle. She listened more than anyone else. She could hear the smiles in people's voices, the sadness hidden in their laughs. She could feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath her bare feet, and she knew the seasons not by sight, but by the smell of the air and the song of the birds. But hardship fell upon the family like a mighty storm. A long drought turned the fields to dust. The goats grew thin and sick. Hunger gnawed at every belly in the village. One day, Amara's father sat before the elders with his head bowed low. His heart was heavy, but his pockets were empty. In secret meetings under the shade of the great Iroko tree, a plan was made. A man from the city, a billionaire named Chief Adewale, had sent word to the villages. He was old and powerful, and though he had everything gold could buy, he had no wife who could bear him children. Rumors said his first 3 wives had left him, whispering that his compound was haunted. Now, he was offering riches beyond measure for a new wife. Any girl would do. Even a blind one. Amara's father fought his tears as he agreed. In exchange for his daughter, Chief Adewale promised bags of rice, new cattle, and money enough to rebuild the farm. To the villagers, it seemed a blessing. To Amara's family, it was survival. They told Amara she was to go to the city, to live in a house bigger than the whole village. She smiled, trusting them, her heart pure. She did not know she was being sold like a goat at the market. On the day she left, the women dressed her in fine wrappers of deep blue and gold, threading bright beads into her thick black hair. They painted her eyes, even though they could not see, and placed heavy golden bangles on her small wrists. The village drummers beat a slow, mournful rhythm as Amara was led away, her hand in the calloused grip of a stranger. The sun burned hot in the sky, but a coldness settled in the hearts of those left behind. The journey to the city was long. Amara sat silently in the back of the dusty Land Rover, her small hands twisting the fabric of her dress nervously. The smells of the city hit her first, sharp, oily, and strange. Loud horns and shouting voices made her shrink back in fear. This was not like the soft winds of her village. When they arrived at the chief's mansion, it was like stepping onto another planet. The gates were taller than trees, the walls painted bright white like the feathers of a sacred bird. Amara could hear the footsteps of many servants, the buzz of machines she could not name, and the low hum of music from unseen speakers. Chief Adewale greeted her. His voice was deep and heavy, and there was something cold in it that made Amara's skin prickle. She bowed her head respectfully, as she had been taught, and followed where they led her. Inside, the mansion was like a world of gold. Marble floors, wide halls, and air so cool it made her shiver. Yet Amara felt lost. The house was too big. Too empty. She was not treated cruelly, not at first. But neither was she treated kindly. Servants spoke to her as if she were a broken thing, a delicate ornament to be placed out of sight. Chief Adewale barely spoke to her after the marriage rites were hurriedly performed in a grand but empty hall. Amara spent her days sitting by a large window she could not see, feeling the warm sunlight on her face and listening to the city sounds beyond the walls. She was lonely, more than she had ever been in her village. But even in that loneliness, a fire began to spark within her. Amara was not weak. She was not broken. Though her eyes could not see the beauty of the world, her heart could still feel it. Her spirit remained strong. And somewhere deep in the house of gold and sorrow, secrets stirred. Secrets that would soon awaken and change her fate forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Amara had learned to navigate the mansion, relying on her keen sense of hearing and smell. The air in the house always smelled of fresh flowers, but to her, it felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were weeping. The mansion, despite its grandeur, was a place of silence and loneliness. Chief Adewale, the powerful man who had bought her, was a distant figure in her life. He rarely visited her chamber, and when he did, it was only to remind her of her duties or give her instructions that felt more like commands. She was to wear beautiful clothes, stay in her chambers, and never leave without his permission. He told her she was his wife, but in his eyes, Amara could see no warmth, no love. She was simply an object, a possession. But the most troubling part was that Amara couldn't even understand why he had married her. She was blind, yes, but she was also strong, capable, and had a deep connection to the earth that was impossible for others to comprehend. She could sense things with her heart and soul. Yet here, in this mansion full of opulence, she was trapped, unseen, ignored. The servants were kind to her in their way. They brought her food, attended to her needs, and spoke to her in whispers, as if she were some fragile bird that might break. There was one young servant named Zuri, a girl with a soft, comforting voice, who would sit with Amara during the quiet afternoons. She would talk about her own dreams, dreams of escape, dreams of a life outside the walls of the mansion. Zuri's presence, however brief, was the only light in Amara's otherwise lonely existence. But as time passed, the weight of the silence became unbearable. One evening, as Amara sat in the vast dining hall, her fingertips lightly tracing the cool surface of a crystal vase, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The heavy, deliberate steps of Chief Adewale. She knew he was coming, and with him, a sense of dread. He had never spoken to her kindly, but that night, there was something different in his approach. He had been restless for days, often pacing through the halls, muttering to himself. When he finally arrived at her side, his voice was more forceful than ever. He spoke of her duty as a wife, of her role in bearing him children. He explained that his lineage must continue, that his wealth and power needed to be passed down through the generations. He spoke of it as though she were simply a tool to fulfill a need. The words stung, like poison in her ears. Amara said nothing, as she had learned to do. She could feel the bitterness in the air, the disappointment in his tone. He had thought that her blindness made her weak, that it would be easy to control her. But what he didn't know was that Amara's spirit could not be broken, no matter how many walls he built around her. And so, Amara's silence grew. But it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of someone who had learned to speak without words, to fight without lifting a finger. The silence of a girl who was more than her circumstances. More than the blindness that defined her in the eyes of others. One day, as Amara sat by the window, she felt the breeze stir outside. It was different today. The air carried a heavy scent of rain, a sign that the earth was about to cleanse itself. She closed her eyes, letting the wind caress her face, and in that moment, she made a decision. She would no longer wait in silence. She would no longer be the passive girl who was sold to a man because of her blindness. The chief had thought her helpless, but he did not know the power that lay within her. That night, after the mansion had fallen silent, Amara rose from her bed. She walked through the cold halls of the mansion, her bare feet soundless against the marble floors. The sound of distant thunder rumbled in the air, and Amara felt the storm coming. The world was on the verge of change, and so was she. In the courtyard, the garden was lush with flowers, a stark contrast to the coldness inside the house. Amara stood there, her hands stretched out, feeling the earth beneath her feet. She could sense the life in the plants, the power in the wind, the promise of the storm. Amara knew that she had to leave, to escape the life that had been forced upon her. She could not be the object that Chief Adewale believed she was. She was more than that, and she would find her own path. With that, she began to make plans, quiet, careful plans. She would use the knowledge she had gained about the mansion, the servants who had shown her kindness, and the earth that had always been her true guide. The storm was coming, but Amara knew that it was not the storm outside that she had to fear. It was the storm inside her. The storm of strength, of defiance, of a girl who would no longer be silenced. The moon rose high in the sky, casting silver light over the mansion as Amara prepared for the hardest step of her journey, leaving the only life she had known. The storm she had felt brewing within her was no longer something distant. It was here, and it raged inside her heart, filling her with a burning determination to reclaim her freedom. She had spent weeks quietly observing. She learned the rhythms of the house, the habits of the servants, the patterns of the guards. She knew the layout of the mansion better than the people who lived there. She could hear the faintest sounds, the rustle of clothes, the whispers of gossip. She used her other senses, her heart, her mind, her spirit, to understand everything that the eyes could not see. Amara knew the chief's schedule. He spent most of his days in meetings or away with his business partners, busy with matters of wealth and power. His absence meant freedom for her, and tonight, as the wind howled outside, she knew the time had come. Zuri, the young servant, had been her only friend in the mansion. Though she was not blind, Zuri had always treated Amara with kindness, her voice soft and filled with compassion. She often shared stories of her own life, her hopes, and dreams of escaping the walls of the mansion. Amara had learned to trust Zuri, and now, it was time to ask for her help. That evening, as Zuri came to deliver Amara's dinner, the air was thick with anticipation. The rain had started, the soft tapping of droplets against the windows like a lullaby to the restless soul. Amara could hear the tremor in Zuri's voice when she entered the room, her steps cautious, as if she feared something. "Amara, are you okay?" Zuri asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara's fingers brushed the edge of the table as she nodded, her heart steady. "I need your help, Zuri. I can't stay here anymore." Zuri hesitated, but she could feel the resolve in Amara's words. She knew that Amara had suffered, trapped in a life that was never meant for her. The thought of helping her friend terrified Zuri. The mansion's walls were tall and guarded, and a single misstep could mean punishment, or worse. But she also knew that if she did nothing, Amara would remain a prisoner forever, a living ghost in a golden cage. "I'll help you," Zuri said, her voice determined, though a little shaky with fear. "But we must act quickly. The chief will be back soon, and his anger is not something we can outrun." Amara's mind raced as she laid out her plan. She had already memorized the route to the servants' quarters, where the staff often slept at night. From there, she could slip unnoticed out of the back gate, into the storm. There, the village beyond the mansion would be her refuge. But the path was fraught with danger. The guards patrolled the perimeter, and the mansion's staff were loyal to their master. If they caught wind of her escape, they would not hesitate to stop her. Zuri listened carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the risk, but she also understood Amara's need for freedom. She could not let her friend face the darkness of this life alone. "Leave it to me," Zuri whispered. "I'll distract the guards. I'll tell them the chief wants you in his study. That should buy you some time." Amara felt a wave of gratitude flood her chest. Zuri's bravery was something Amara had never expected, and yet it was the very kindness that had kept her spirit alive in this place. She nodded, her fingers gently brushing Zuri's hand in thanks. The plan was simple, but it was risky. Still, Amara knew that it was the only chance she had. With one final look around the cold, opulent room that had been her prison, she stood up, feeling the weight of the decision that she was about to make. The mansion, with all its gold and luxury, meant nothing to her anymore. Her eyes, though blind, were wide open to the truth. She had been sold into a life of silence and submission, but she would not let that define her. She was more than the price that had been paid for her. She was a daughter of the earth, a child of the storm, and it was time to reclaim her place in the world. As Amara stepped toward the door, she heard Zuri's soft footsteps behind her, a steady presence that filled her with the courage to move forward. They moved through the halls, careful to avoid the guards and servants who might cross their path. The mansion seemed to grow larger as they walked, the walls pressing in on her, but Amara refused to be afraid. They reached the back gate, hidden behind a tall hedge of thick vines. The rain fell harder now, drenching them both as they paused at the threshold. For a moment, Amara closed her eyes, feeling the cool droplets against her skin, breathing in the fresh, wet air. It was the smell of freedom. "Go," Zuri urged, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I'll make sure no one follows you." With a final, grateful touch, Amara stepped through the gate and into the rain. She could hear the distant sounds of the village, the familiar voices of the people who had once been strangers, but now, felt like family. She was free, finally. But the journey ahead was still uncertain. The world beyond the mansion was vast, and Amara's blindness meant she had to rely on her instincts and the kindness of strangers. She knew the road would not be easy. But the storm inside her heart was now matched by the storm around her, fierce, unstoppable, and full of promise. As she walked into the night, her soul alight with hope, she heard the faint sound of drums in the distance. The drums of her people, calling her home. The rain fell in sheets, drenching Amara as she walked through the night. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the rhythm of her footsteps. She couldn't see the world around her, but she could feel it, the soft earth beneath her feet, the cold wind in her face, the steady patter of rain on the ground. She had never been outside the mansion walls before. Everything was new to her now, the smell of the wet earth, the distant cries of night birds, the rustling of leaves in the trees. Each sound was a piece of a world she had longed for but could never see. Now, it was hers to explore, to claim as her own. Amara knew that the road ahead was uncertain. Her blindness, while not a curse to her, made the world a dangerous place. The streets of the city were unfamiliar, and the vastness of it all made her feel small. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The storm inside her heart, the fire that had sparked when she made the decision to leave, burned bright and fierce, lighting her path forward. Zuri had kept her promise, distracting the guards, sending Amara on her way with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of hope. Amara knew Zuri would face consequences for helping her escape. But in that moment, Amara couldn't think of that. She had to keep moving forward, for both of them. The village was still far away, and Amara had no way of knowing how long the journey would take. She could only trust the rhythm of the rain, the sounds of the world around her, and her own instincts. Her journey felt like a rebirth. Every step she took was one further away from the life she had been sold into, from the mansion and the coldness of Chief Adewale's home. She walked on, her fingers brushing against the leaves and branches of trees as she moved. The familiar smells of the earth, wet soil, fresh grass, ground her, reminding her that even in this vast, unfamiliar world, she was never truly alone. The earth would always guide her. As the night grew darker, the rain showed no signs of stopping. But Amara didn't mind. The storm felt like a cleansing, a washing away of the past. It was as though the world itself was helping her break free. She could feel the storm in her bones, in her spirit, and it made her stronger. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. As the rain poured down harder, the mud beneath her feet grew thicker, making it harder for her to move quickly. Her feet slipped, and she stumbled more than once. She gritted her teeth and pressed on, each step more difficult than the last. She couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when freedom was within reach. After what felt like hours, Amara finally heard the sound of voices in the distance, laughter, singing, and the rhythmic thud of drums. Her heart skipped a beat. The village was close. The moment she heard those familiar sounds, her legs moved faster, and she followed the sound of the drums, trusting her instincts. The closer she got, the more she could hear the laughter of people, the music, and the chatter of a community that had long been a part of her. Her heart swelled with emotion. This was where she was from. This was where she belonged. The city, the mansion, the coldness of Chief Adewale's world, it had all been a dream, a nightmare she had woken up from. Now, the village awaited her. She could feel it in her bones, the pull of her roots, the love of her people, the warmth of home. But just as she began to feel the comfort of familiarity, a voice called out. The sound was low and commanding, and it froze Amara in her tracks. She could not tell if the voice belonged to a man or a woman, but she knew one thing, it was not someone from her village. Who goes there? The voice demanded. Amara's heart raced, and her mind scrambled for a plan. She knew she couldn't stay where she was. She had to keep moving, keep heading toward the village. The voice grew louder, closer. You there? Stop. Amara's breath caught in her throat, and a cold wave of fear swept over her. Her body was frozen, as if the storm had reached into her soul and chilled her to the bone. She could hear the footsteps of someone approaching, heavy and deliberate. The figure was close now. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension, the danger. Whoever this was, they were not from her village. They were a threat, and Amara had no choice but to keep moving. As the figure approached, she took a deep breath and pivoted on her heel, trying to slip into the thick brush that lined the road. Her hands outstretched, she felt the branches scratch against her skin, but she didn't stop. Every step was one of survival, and the sounds of the storm masked her movements. The footsteps grew louder, and then suddenly, the figure stopped. Amara held her breath, waiting. She could feel the figure standing still, listening for her next move. She knew she had only moments before they found her. The moment felt like an eternity, but Amara knew what she had to do. With the wind in her hair, the rain pouring down her back, she gathered all the strength she could muster and sprinted through the brush, her body guided by the force of the storm, her senses sharp with adrenaline. Just as she felt the figure move toward her, the sound of the drums grew louder, and the warmth of the village washed over her. She broke free from the brush and ran, no longer listening to the footsteps behind her. Her legs carried her, her heart urged her forward. The storm might chase her, but she would outrun it. In the distance, she heard the welcoming voices of the villagers. Her people. Her home. She was close. The figure behind her called out once more, but it was too late. Amara had reached the village, and with a final burst of speed, she disappeared into the safety of her people's embrace. Amara's feet pounded the earth as she entered the heart of the village, her pulse in sync with the beat of the drums. She could hear the chatter of the villagers, the familiar voices she had once known as a child. It was the sound of life, the sound of community, and it was like a balm to her weary soul. Her legs were trembling, her breath ragged from the long run, but she didn't stop. She could feel the safety of the village now, the warmth of the fires burning in the homes, the smell of cooking food in the air. But despite the comfort that awaited her, a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. Zuri had helped her escape, and she was still out there, risking everything to help Amara. The thought of her friend's sacrifice gnawed at her heart. But now was not the time to stop. She had to keep moving, keep going. The village was near, and her people awaited her. The drums beat louder, and she felt her heartbeat matching their rhythm. The village was alive, and as she neared the center of the gathering, Amara slowed her pace. She stood at the edge of the clearing, listening to the sounds of laughter, of voices calling out in greeting, and the echo of the drums. It was then that she heard a voice, one that felt like a familiar echo from her past. It was the voice of an elder, a woman known throughout the village for her wisdom and kindness. Amara had once played near her hut as a child, listening to her stories of the old ways, of the spirits that watched over their people. Amara. The elder's voice was soft but filled with surprise, as if she too had sensed the presence of the girl who had once been a part of this village. Amara, is that you? Amara's heart leaped, and her hands instinctively reached out, her fingers brushing against the familiar warmth of the elder's arm. The elder's skin was weathered, but there was a softness in her touch, a comfort that Amara hadn't felt in so long. "Yes, it's me," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The elder's hands guided her gently toward the fire, and she could feel the heat radiating from the flames. The scent of burning wood and herbs filled the air. She felt safe, secure, and yet a deep sadness still hung in her heart. She had escaped the mansion, but the pain of what she had left behind, of what she had been through, still lingered. "Sit with me, child," the elder said, her voice steady and filled with warmth. "You have traveled far. Tell me what has brought you back." Amara sat down on the ground, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric of the elder's shawl. The fire crackled, and she could feel the warmth seep into her bones, but there was a coldness inside her that the flames could not reach. "I was sold," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was sold to a man in the city. He thought I was weak because I was blind, but I was never weak. I'm not weak. I had to escape. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't live like that." The elder nodded, her face solemn. "The spirits have been watching over you, child. We knew you would find your way home. Your heart is strong, even if the world tried to break it. You have come back to us, where you belong." Amara felt tears well up in her eyes, but she fought to keep them at bay. She had cried so many times in the mansion, in the silence of her chamber, when no one could hear her. She had cried for the life she had lost, for the dreams that had been stolen from her. But now, sitting here with the elder, in the warmth of the village, she could feel the weight of her journey lifting. She was home, and for the first time in so long, she felt at peace. "But what about Zuri?" Amara asked, her voice breaking. "She helped me escape. She's still in the mansion, and I can't leave her there. She could be punished for what she did." The elder's face softened with understanding. "The spirits will protect her, child. But you must not let guilt tie you to the past. You are free now. The world outside the walls of that mansion is full of opportunities, full of life. Your path is your own now, and it is time for you to walk it." Amara closed her eyes, listening to the drums, the laughter, and the voices of the villagers. She had returned home, but the path ahead of her was still unclear. The storm inside her heart had subsided, but a new challenge awaited her, one that would require more than just her strength. The next morning, as the village awoke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of fresh bread baking, Amara stood at the edge of the village, gazing out toward the horizon. The storm clouds had passed, and the sky was clear. For the first time in a long while, she could see the world not with her eyes, but with her heart. The earth beneath her feet, the wind in her hair, the sounds of life, they were all calling her. She knew now that she wasn't just a blind girl. She wasn't just the girl who had been sold into marriage. She was Amara, a daughter of the earth, a woman with a future of her own making. And no matter what lay ahead, she would face it with the strength she had found within herself. The village was where she belonged, but her journey was far from over. The world outside the village was vast, and Amara had only just begun to explore it. The morning sun rose slowly over the village, casting golden light across the fields, the thatched huts, and the people who began to stir in their homes. Amara stood at the edge of the village, still surrounded by the serenity of the landscape. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery drifted toward her, mingling with the earthy scent of the rain-soaked earth beneath her feet. Her feet, now firmly planted on her native soil, felt a deep connection to the land, to the history of the people who had once walked this path before her. The stories the elder had shared with her, stories of ancestors who had faced trials and emerged stronger, resonated in Amara's heart. She wasn't the first to face adversity, and she wouldn't be the last. But what set her apart was her refusal to be defined by the past. The girl who had once been sold was no longer the girl she had been. She had been reborn. But though Amara had returned home, the world she once knew felt distant and changed. She had spent so many years in the mansion, isolated and ignored, that even now, back among her own people, the familiarity of the village felt both comforting and foreign. She knew she would have to carve out her place again, just as she had in the mansion, but this time, it would be on her own terms. The villagers, seeing her return, greeted her with open arms. They had heard of her escape, the courage it must have taken, and they offered her a warm welcome. Yet, as much as they wished to help, they knew that Amara had to find her own way now. They respected her strength, but they understood that this was a journey she must complete alone. The days passed, and Amara began to settle into a routine. She helped the elders with their work in the fields, her senses attuned to the rhythm of the land. She learned to weave baskets with the women, the fibers of the grass smooth in her hands. The work was hard, but Amara didn't mind. The labor felt like a connection to the earth, the very heart of her village. But as she worked, her mind was never far from the thoughts of Zuri. Her friend, still trapped in the mansion, weighed heavily on her heart. Amara's freedom, as much as it had brought her peace, felt incomplete without knowing that Zuri was safe. She could not let her friend suffer for her bravery, for the choice she had made to escape. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Amara sat by the fire with the elder. The woman's presence was a steady comfort, a reminder of the wisdom of the generations before her. Amara's thoughts returned, once again, to Zuri. "I cannot forget her," Amara said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "I left her behind, and I cannot live knowing she is still there, alone." The elder sat quietly beside her, watching the flames dance in the fire. "You are not alone, Amara," the elder said, her voice as deep and steady as the earth itself. "The spirits walk with you. You have done what was needed to free yourself. But now, you must ask yourself, what will you do with the freedom you have gained?" Amara felt a deep stirring in her heart. The elder's words were not a reproach, they were a call to action. She couldn't simply wait for Zuri to return or for someone else to act on her behalf. If she wanted to help her friend, she would have to do it herself. Her decision became clear. She had come back to the village, but her journey was far from over. She needed to face the world once again, to return to the mansion and rescue Zuri. It was the only way she could repay the kindness her friend had shown her. "I will go back," Amara said, her voice stronger now, filled with resolve. "I will go back and bring Zuri home. I can't leave her there." The elder's face softened, her eyes full of understanding. "The road ahead will not be easy, child," she warned. "But I have no doubt that you will walk it with the strength of your ancestors. Your heart is pure, and your purpose is clear. Do not let fear hold you back. You are more than the circumstances of your past." Amara nodded, the weight of her decision settling into her bones. She had made the choice, and now, there was no turning back. The mansion that had once been a prison would soon be the place where she would reclaim her friend and, in doing so, her own sense of purpose. The next morning, as the village woke to another day, Amara began to prepare for the journey back to the city. She packed a small bundle of food and water, enough to see her through the first part of the trip. She knew the road would be difficult, and it would take all the strength she had, but she was determined. Before she left, the elder gave her a parting gift, a small pouch of herbs and charms that would offer protection on her journey. "May the spirits guide you," the elder said, pressing the pouch into Amara's hands. "May they keep you safe and grant you the wisdom you need." Amara thanked the elder, her heart full of gratitude. She didn't know what would await her at the mansion, but she did know one thing: she was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was Amara, the woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her purpose. And she would stop at nothing to rescue her friend. As she set off on the road once again, Amara's heart was heavy with the thought of Zuri, but it was also light with hope. The world was vast, full of uncertainty, but she was no longer afraid. With each step, she was reclaiming her power. And though the road ahead was long, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in her path. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the landscape as Amara walked the dusty road toward the city. The earth beneath her feet felt solid, but the path ahead seemed uncertain. She had left the village behind, the familiar sounds of the drums and the comforting voices of her people slowly fading into the distance. Her heart was heavy with determination, but there was a lingering ache of fear for Zuri and fear of what lay ahead. As she walked, Amara's thoughts drifted back to the mansion. The grand walls, the cold marble floors, the silence that had filled her days like an oppressive weight. She could still remember the hollow echo of her footsteps in those empty halls, the quietness of her life there. But that was no longer who she was. That girl who had been trapped by the circumstances of her birth, the girl who had been sold like a possession, was gone. Now, she was walking toward that place with a purpose. Not as a wife, not as an object to be owned, but as a woman reclaiming her power and rescuing the friend who had given her the strength to break free. The road to the city was long, and Amara could feel the strain on her body. Her legs ached, her feet were sore, and the weight of the journey pressed heavily on her shoulders. But she refused to stop. Every step she took was one step closer to the mansion, one step closer to the woman she had promised to help. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Amara reached a small river. The sound of the water flowing over the stones was soothing, and she knelt beside it to drink. The coolness of the water refreshed her, and she took a moment to rest. Her thoughts turned once again to Zuri. She could picture her friend, the way her voice had always been full of hope, full of life. But in the mansion, Zuri had been nothing more than a servant, a silent witness to the coldness of Chief Adewale's world. "I won't let her stay there," Amara whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "I will bring her back." Her heart was a storm of emotions as she rose from the riverbank, her resolve hardening with each passing minute. She had no plan, no guarantee of success, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not turn back. She had come too far, and she could not fail. As the night began to settle, Amara found a place to sleep beneath the stars. She wrapped herself in her shawl, letting the cool breeze wash over her. The night was quiet, but her mind was alive with thoughts of Zuri and the mansion that awaited her. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of distant lands, of freedom, of a world where she and Zuri could live without fear. The next day, the journey continued. The landscape changed as Amara neared the city. The open fields gave way to crowded streets, the sounds of bustling markets replacing the birdsong and the wind. The city was louder, faster, and more chaotic than anything she had ever known. She could hear the clatter of carts, the calls of merchants selling their wares, the honking of horns as cars zoomed by. It was overwhelming, and Amara's senses were on high alert. But despite the noise, Amara moved with purpose. She could feel the mansion's looming presence even before she saw it. It was a building like no other in the city. Tall, cold, and imposing, with walls that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. It stood as a testament to the wealth and power of its owner, Chief Adewale, but to Amara, it was a prison. The place that had stolen her future and held her in silence for far too long. She stood at the gates of the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The guards stood at attention, their eyes sharp, their postures rigid. Amara knew she couldn't simply walk in. She had to be careful, to use her wits to get inside. She had no allies here, no one to turn to but herself. As she approached the gates, she heard voices, the guards were talking, their attention diverted. This was her chance. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to do. With a swift movement, she slipped past the gates, her body blending into the shadows. She had memorized the layout of the mansion when she had lived there, and now it was time to put that knowledge to use. Amara moved silently through the grounds, avoiding the watchful eyes of the guards. Her steps were calculated, her senses heightened as she listened for any sound that might give her away. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the mansion's walls pressing in on her, but she pressed forward. She had come too far to be stopped now. She reached the servants' quarters first. She had spent many hours in this part of the mansion, learning the rhythms of the staff, the time when they gathered, the moments when they would be distracted. She knew Zuri would be here, and she had to act fast. Amara crept into the shadows, her heart racing as she moved toward Zuri's room. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her, the risk of being caught, the possibility of failure, but none of it mattered. Zuri had helped her once, and now it was her turn to return the favor. As she reached the door to Zuri's room, Amara paused. Her hand rested on the doorknob, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. This was it. The moment of truth. With a quiet turn of the knob, the door creaked open. Amara's hand trembled slightly as she turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, but the sound was drowned by the noises of the mansion, the distant echoes of footsteps, the clinking of silver, and the murmur of voices in the hallway. The air in the servants' quarters was thick with tension. Her heart raced in her chest, but she steeled herself. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As the door fully opened, Amara stepped into the dimly lit room. It was quiet here, a stark contrast to the bustling corridors outside. She could hear the faint rustling of fabric as Zuri moved around inside. The air was heavy with the smell of herbs and cleaning oils, a familiar scent that made Amara feel a surge of nostalgia and guilt. She had once lived in this very place, but now, the room felt like a different world. A world she no longer belonged to. Zuri? Amara whispered softly, her voice trembling with emotion. There was a pause. The soft shuffle of footsteps stopped, and then Amara heard Zuri's voice, a sound that had comforted her for so long. Amara? Is it really you? Zuri's voice was full of disbelief and shock, but there was a warmth in it, too. She had always been a beacon of hope, even in the darkest times. Amara nodded, though Zuri couldn't see her. Yes, it's me. I've come to get you. We're leaving. We're going home. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. There was a brief silence, as if Zuri couldn't quite process what Amara was saying. Amara could feel the tension in the air as Zuri moved closer, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly in the room. You escaped? Zuri asked, her voice barely a whisper. Amara nodded again. I did. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't live like that. And I won't leave you behind. Zuri let out a shaky breath, and Amara could hear the faint sound of tears in her voice. I never thought you'd come back for me. I thought I was lost here forever. Amara's heart ached as she reached out to grasp Zuri's hand. You're not lost, Zuri. We're both getting out of here. Together. There was a brief pause as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Zuri was still hesitant, torn between the fear of leaving the only life she had known and the hope of escaping the mansion forever. The walls of the mansion, though cold and oppressive, had been familiar. The unknown was a terrifying thought. But Amara's presence, her unwavering determination, made Zuri realize that there was a chance, a real chance, for freedom. We have to hurry, Amara urged gently, her grip on Zuri's hand tightening. The guards are all around. We can't stay here long. Zuri nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek as she followed Amara's lead. Together, they slipped quietly out of the room, making their way down the hallway. Amara's senses were sharp, her ears listening intently for the slightest sound of movement. The air felt heavy with the weight of their escape, and Amara knew that time was running out. As they crept down the stairs, Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The mansion, with all its grandeur, felt suffocating now, its walls closing in on them. She could feel the cold stone beneath her feet, the echo of their footsteps reverberating through the halls. Every shadow, every turn, seemed to hold a danger. But Amara refused to be afraid. She was not the frightened girl who had once walked these halls. She was stronger now, strong enough to face whatever came her way. They reached the back door, the one that led to the servants' quarters. Amara's pulse quickened as she pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the wood seeming to sound louder than ever before. Her mind raced, knowing that once they stepped outside, there would be no turning back. Zuri glanced at Amara, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "What if we're caught?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We won't be caught," Amara said firmly. "We've come this far. We'll make it." With one final breath, they stepped outside, into the cool night air. The mansion loomed behind them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Amara could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. They had escaped, but they were not free yet. There were still guards patrolling the perimeter, still dangers ahead. But she could hear the distant sounds of the city, the sounds of people who lived without fear, without the weight of oppression on their shoulders. They moved quickly through the garden, using the trees and bushes as cover. The scent of damp earth and flowers filled the air, but Amara's senses were focused entirely on the path ahead. She could feel Zuri's hand in hers, her grip steady, and it gave her the strength to keep going. They reached the gate, the heavy iron bars standing between them and the world beyond. Amara's heart pounded as she reached for the lock. She had seen this gate countless times, and now, it felt like the final barrier to their freedom. With a soft click, the lock gave way, and the gate creaked open. They stepped through, and Amara could feel the weight of the mansion lift from her shoulders. It was done. They had escaped. But just as they moved away from the mansion, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. The guards were coming. They hadn't been fast enough. Amara's heart stopped in her chest. She could hear their voices growing louder, the heavy boots of the guards pounding on the ground as they raced toward the gate. They had to move faster. "Run!" Amara urged, her voice full of urgency. Zuri's breath was coming in sharp gasps, but they both took off, sprinting as fast as they could through the darkened streets. The city was alive with the sounds of the night, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the escape, the distance between them and the mansion. Amara's legs burned, her breath ragged, but she didn't stop. She could hear the guards' voices behind them, closer now, but she kept running. And just as the guards were nearly upon them, they turned a corner, slipping into the shadows where the guards couldn't see. For a long moment, they stood in silence, listening to the fading footsteps of the guards. The sound of their pursuers slowly disappeared, and Amara finally let out the breath she had been holding. "We're free," Amara whispered, her voice filled with relief. Zuri collapsed beside her, her body trembling with exhaustion, but a smile spread across her face. "We're free," she echoed. And in that moment, with the city around them and the mansion far behind, Amara knew that this was just the beginning. They had escaped, but the world was still vast, full of unknowns and dangers. But Amara was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was a woman who had found her strength, who had rescued the one person who had helped her escape. And together, they would build a future of their own. Amara and Zuri ran through the dark streets, their bodies sore, but their spirits soaring. The cold night air whipped against their skin as they pushed themselves further from the mansion. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they had to keep moving. The guards would soon realize they were gone, and the city was vast, full of hidden dangers. But in this moment, freedom tasted sweeter than anything else they had ever known. As the streets grew quieter, and the sounds of their footsteps began to fade, they found a small, quiet alley where they could finally stop and catch their breath. Their bodies trembled with exhaustion, but a sense of peace began to settle over them. They were no longer prisoners, they were free. Zuri sat down on the cold ground, her chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. She looked at Amara, her eyes full of gratitude and wonder. "Amara. I never thought we would escape. I never thought we would make it out." Amara smiled softly, sitting down beside her friend. "We made it because we believed in each other. I couldn't leave you behind. You helped me once, and now, I'm here to help you. Together, we're strong." Zuri nodded, her hands shaking as she reached for Amara's. "You gave me hope, Amara. You taught me that there's more to life than just surviving. There's a world out there, waiting for us to live in it." The two friends sat in the quiet alley, the weight of the night sinking in. For so long, they had been trapped in a world that had sought to break them, but now, they had escaped. They had faced their fears, defied the odds, and found a way out. After a long silence, Amara finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "We're free now, but our journey is far from over. The world is big, and there's so much we don't know. But one thing I've learned through all of this is that we are not defined by what happens to us. We are not defined by the hardships we face, or the people who try to control us. We define ourselves. We get to choose who we are, no matter what anyone else says." Zuri listened intently, her eyes locked on Amara's. "So, what do we do now?" Amara smiled, her heart light with possibility. "We live. We build our lives from the ground up, on our own terms. We take what we've learned from this journey and use it to create a future where we are free. Where we are valued not for what others want from us, but for who we truly are." The two women sat together, not just as survivors, but as women who had reclaimed their futures. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. They knew that the scars of their past would not disappear overnight. But they also knew that the most important thing was that they had chosen their path. They had taken control of their destiny, and no one could ever take that from them. As the first light of dawn broke through the sky, painting the world in hues of gold and pink, Amara stood up. She extended her hand to Zuri, and together, they walked out of the alley, ready to face whatever came next. The world was wide, and it was theirs to explore. The story of Amara and Zuri teaches us a powerful lesson about strength, freedom, and the importance of self-determination. Amara's journey shows us that no matter the circumstances we are born into, we have the power to shape our own destiny. Though she was blind, poor, and sold as a wife, she did not let these conditions define her. Instead, she used her inner strength, her determination, and the love of a friend to escape and claim her freedom. The lesson here is that we are not defined by the hardships we face, but by how we choose to respond to them. Life may throw challenges our way, and others may try to control us, but we have the power to choose our own path. We must never forget that our worth is not determined by others' perceptions or by the circumstances we face, but by our ability to define ourselves and to rise above adversity. Amara's story is a reminder that true freedom comes from within. From having the courage to stand up for ourselves, to break free from the chains that bind us, and to forge a life on our own terms. And just as Amara rescued Zuri, we too can support and uplift each other, reminding ourselves that we are never alone in our struggles. Please don't forget to subscribe to more beautiful stories. Thanks for watching. God bless you.